Thanks to Anker for sponsoring this video. When Apple introduced the 10th gen iPad, it was a little confusing. I picked one up, I've been using it, I'll talk about my experiences in a little bit, but this product seemed to have unearthed a little bit of hate for the iPad. And honestly, I wasn't really sure why. Like, yes, it has a USB-C port, and the Apple Pencil first generation still uses Lightning, so you gotta use a weird adapter, which is dumb. And it has some features that the other iPads should have, but you're getting it on, I guess, the newest base iPad. So there are some weird things about it, but as a product, I still think this is pretty great. But the more I think about it, I think the issue is not this iPad, it's the entire iPad line, because right now, especially with the introduction of this, it's not making a ton of sense. The iPad has become confusing. On the high end, we have the iPad Pro, which for all intents and purposes, especially when it comes to hardware, is the best tablet ever made, even though it's using basically the same design that we've had since 2018. Even then, it's still an excellent product. And on the low end, we still have a $329 entry-level tablet that many people are able to afford, and it still does most of the things that you would be doing on that very high-end iPad Pro. But I think that uniformity in the line, the fact that you could buy the base iPad or the iPad Pro and still get a iPadOS experience, was starting to become a problem. It really feels like it's time Apple, takes that next step and makes the iPad Pro or the high-end iPads different and more capable than what they are now. And I think the fact that they haven't done that is leading to some, if not anger, at least confusion. And I think Apple agrees with this, and that is why iPadOS 16 is here with some special features only for the iPad Pro or the iPad Air. Because for me, when I've used the 10th gen iPad, which is not the lowest level, but right above that base entry iPad, this thing is excellent. And I think for most people, this is the iPad you should buy. Okay, real quick before I keep going, I want to thank this video sponsor Anker and some of their iPad specific products that just take what you can do with it to the next level. So this is the Anker 551 USB-C Hub. This is the ultimate multitasking hub for the new iPads and iPadOS 16, and it's the world's first USB-C hub that's also a foldable stand all-in-one that's designed for iPads. And this is the Anker 541 USB-C Hub, which is the most compact and powerful hub for new iPads with iPadOS 16. Now the Anker 551 is great because it enables you to use your iPad in desktop mode like a full computer. It has an HDMI port on the back that supports a 4K monitor. It has a micro SD and full-size SD card slot so you can transfer data. It has USB-C ports, you can charge the iPad. Pretty much everything you would want in an iPad hub is here, and it also holds your iPad. And it's fully adjustable, so you can adjust the iPad, tilt it down, bring it up, depending on what you are doing. Now the Anker 541, on the other hand, does basically the same thing, but it just plugs into the USB-C port on your iPad, so you can take it with you anywhere. It's small, lightweight, portable, and it still has the micro and full-size SD card slot. It has USB-A, USB-C, and HDMI, so almost everything that you would need on the go, this has you covered. It's a good thing that Apple added the USB-C port to the iPads, which makes it a lot more versatile, but there's still a ton you can't do with it out of the box. And that's where Anker steps in, and I think these products are a knock out of the park. So if you're looking for hubs or docking stations for your iPads, Anker's 551 or 541 with unrivaled performance will definitely meet your needs. So if you want to check these out, I'll leave links down below where you can pick them up for yourself and just make the iPad do more than it ever could before. I think the design of this iPad is great. I love the colors, especially this yellow. It just gives a little bit more of a pop. And I mean, it's the same basic design that we've had on the iPads with all the other versions. But there are a few key details here that I think are excellent, and I really hope come to the other iPads in the line. It's just kind of interesting that they started it with this lower end iPad. And the first one is the camera placement. It's now on the long end of the iPad instead of the short end. So if you're holding it in landscape mode rather than portrait, now when you look at the camera, you're actually looking at the camera instead of it being off to the side. That is inevitable. It seemed like it was going to happen at some point since the majority of people seem to use their iPad in landscape mode. So it's no surprise that it happened, but now that it's here, it's a big update. It's one that we are all expecting to come to the other iPads, but it is welcome. Oh, and by the way, that's probably the likely reason why we don't have Apple Pencil 2 support here, because that connects over wireless charging with a magnetic strip on the side. So there probably isn't enough space to include both of those things in that area. So I'm sure Apple is working on a way to change that and adjust it, but that's probably why it's not here. The other thing I absolutely love about this iPad is not so much the iPad itself, but the accessories. This new Magic Keyboard Folio is one of my favorite accessories Apple has made in years. And while this isn't, let's say, a revolutionary design, this is very similar to what the Microsoft Surface has been doing for ever. It is still something that I'm very welcome to see here. Now, it's not perfect. I don't love the way that if we snap this on, I don't love this floppiness. It makes it very hard to use on your lap. And I just don't like that. I prefer the original Magic Keyboard for this, but the fact that it's detachable, so I don't need to use the keyboard if I don't want to. And instead I could still just have a kickstand on my iPad. Excellent. I absolutely love that. And this is the one feature that I hope comes to all the other iPads. I think it will, because this is a game changer. But honestly, I mean, other than those two things, this iPad is an iPad. There isn't too much new or too much unique here that you wouldn't be able to do on other iPads. It's just an affordable iPad that has the latest design and all the cool features that you'd hope for. But then that's where the confusion comes in, not because of this product, but because of everything else in the line. Okay, so the issue with the iPad line, I don't think is so much the products. I think these are great. Yeah, they all have their quirks. There's things that we wish would be changed with them, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But it's not so much that. It's more which one should you choose and how do you make that choice. That is where the confusion comes in, and the introduction of the 10th gen just makes that so much harder. And the biggest issue I'm seeing is whether or not the extra horsepower, the extra premium hardware is worth it for iPad OS, especially when you compare the 10th gen iPad, this new one, to the iPad Air. There are differences, but they are very few and far between. If you just look at them on face value, they're basically the same iPad. You get Touch ID, you get a basically 11-inch screen on both, colors, you get USB-C. I mean, the list goes on of the similarities, and the differences are really the processor. The iPad Air gets the M1 processor inside, where this gets the A14, which is a few generations old, but still snappy on the iPad 10th gen. The iPad Air does have a better screen since it's laminated. That's probably my biggest issue with the 10th gen iPad. For me personally, you could definitely tell that the screen is of lesser quality, but it's still not ProMotion on the iPad Air, so not really a huge deal in terms of day-to-day use. The iPad Air does use that second generation Apple Pencil if that's something that's important to you, but the 10th gen has the landscape camera. So on paper, yes, there are differences, but it really comes down to what you are using these iPads for, and that is where iPadOS 16 comes in, specifically with Stage Manager. It has been years since we have been begging Apple to just do something with iPadOS and make it a more desktop-like experience, or at least give us the option to do that. And that's exactly what they did with Stage Manager. Now, luckily, Apple did expand what devices can use Stage Manager. Before, it was just an M1 or now M2 feature, but they expanded it to the original iPad Pro. So that is nice. You don't have to buy the absolute top-line newest iPad to use it. And because of Stage Manager, that is a reason why you would want an iPad Air or an iPad Pro over the lower end iPads, because it's something that Apple doesn't let you do on those lower end iPads. But the question is Stage Manager worth it? Now, I've been using it since the beta first came out in June, and the more I use it, the more I don't really like it. And it feels like a feature that Apple knew they had to make because people were really asking for it, but they also just didn't want to do what they do on the Mac and just, port that over. They wanted to make it unique and something special for the iPad. And in a way, I can appreciate it. There's things about it that I like. I like the snapping, I like the resizing, and the way that it uses apps in almost a native way. So like you can have an iPhone size, you can go to an iPad size. Like, I like the way it does that, but it's also very frustrating because I can't put the window wherever I want it. I can't easily, toggle between different windows. Even after the learning curve of getting used to it and figuring out how everything works, it still just feels kind of clunky. And I think Apple knows this too. I mean, from all the cries of people who use the iPad Pro wanting these more pro level features and then being disappointed with Stage Manager, it seems like it just didn't work. We actually did get a rumor that Apple may be working on some kind of Mac OS Lite type operating system that would work on the iPad Pro that would give you, I guess, a more native Mac experience, but on the iPad. And that, I think, is what most people were actually wanting. They just want the Windows support that we're used to and everything that you could do on the Mac on the iPad. And if it means it's a little stripped down just so, you can't run like Mac applications, for instance, okay, fine, even though that would be nice too, but that would just be better. And I think Stage Manager, even though the intention was good, wasn't exactly the best iteration of it. But let's leave Stage Manager aside and talk about Pro apps. That's still something that isn't here, and that alone would be a main reason why most people, I think, would get the Pro versions or the higher end versions of the iPad over the lower end versions. If you could only run those Pro apps like Final Cut, Logic, or any of the multitude of third-party apps that people would eventually develop, if you could run those on the iPad Pro only and not on the other ones, people would buy those, especially, professionals. But right now, it's more of a hardware thing. Like, do you want that mini LED display? Do you want that M2 processor? Do you want the camera system with LiDAR? Like, if you need those things, then you go for the iPad Pro. But if you just want an iPad that works, you're buying one for your parents, you're buying one for a sibling or a friend, or I don't know why you're buying your friend an iPad. But if you are, you're not going to be spending, $1,000. You're going to get them the 10th gen iPad or even the base iPad, and they're going to be happy because it does pretty much everything that an iPad currently does. And that's why I think the iPad 10th gen just kind of exposed what Apple is doing wrong with the iPad line. But luckily, there's a few key things I think they could do and do very quickly to make the iPad line make a lot of sense. So first, let's talk about the software. Make iPadOS 16 the multitasking beast that I think a lot of us were hoping Stage Manager would be, and it just ended up not being. Bring macOS Lite or just a more refined Stage Manager, I think we'll be happy. Also, take that step and release some of Apple's native professional apps on here, if not only just to let third parties know that, hey, this is possible and this is something we want you to do with the iPad. Now, on the hardware side, on the top end, the iPad Pro is great. Yes, the update this year was pretty minimal and didn't really do much, but it's still really good hardware. And until we get that software, there's not a big compelling reason why you need something different. So, we can leave that alone for now. Just continue doing your update cycles. Now on the low end, the 9th gen iPad makes a lot of sense still because obviously this is the most affordable version. They're probably selling a ton to schools or, for gifts, things like that. This is a iPad that makes sense. Although I do think it would be better if the 10th gen iPad replaced that. From a cost perspective, maybe wouldn't be possible, but I would still axe that base iPad and make the 10th gen the entry level. And that brings us to the iPad Air, which is where all of this gets really confusing. Like I said, the iPad Air and the 10th gen iPad are basically the same product. And the more I use the 10th gen iPad, the more I'm convinced the iPad Air just doesn't make that much sense, especially if the iPad Pro doesn't get something like a mini LED display or an OLED display like might be rumored. If they kind of keep the 11-inch iPad Pro as what it is now, then the iPad Air just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the iPad mini, I think they keep it around, but that's kind of a different product. It's very niche and you have a specific reason for wanting it. Check out my iPad mini review for more on that. But that I think would incredibly simplify the line and make a lot of sense. You have the base iPad for your basic iPad tasks, and then you have the iPad Pro for everything professional with the updated Stage Manager or whatever they call this next version of iPadOS. And that would solve the confusion when you walk into the store. Like, do I need to pay $5.99? Do I need to pay $4.99? Or no, do I want an iPad for basic iPad stuff, or do I want a Pro iPad for all the Pro tasks? Now, will Apple do this? I don't think so. I think Apple makes too much money on the base iPad to really get rid of that. So then you have that base iPad for $329. Then you have the $449 10th gen iPad Pro, which that is kind of already confusing there. And the iPad Air, I think Apple wants it to be an affordable version that can still run all the Pro apps, especially now that it has an M1 chip inside. So I don't think they're going to get rid of that either. So you almost have like two tiers of iPad. You have the bottom end of the iPad and the top end of the iPad, where the bottom end is the base iPad and this 10th gen, and then the top end is the iPad Air at the bottom of the Pro end and the Pro iPad at the top end. So it's a little confusing. I don't think Apple's going to do much about it yet, but I do see a light at the end of the tunnel of what Apple could do. But it really comes back to the age-old thing that we have been asking Apple to do, and that is take the iPad seriously and make changes to it that actually make sense and that we would all love to see. I've named a few things that I think make sense, but I don't have all the answers. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but at the very least, I'd love to see Apple make that attempt and just make the iPad make sense again.